You are now listening to In the Weeds Live, a podcast designed to build, inspire, and educate the hemp industry. Brought to you by U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos, Sunbelt Hemp Source, Hemp Harvest Works, Fish Enterprises, and Elite Extraction. Podcasts of In the Weeds Live can be found at intheweedslive.com. And now here's the show, In the Weeds Live.
Welcome everyone to In the Weeds Live. This is exciting episode 2. We are fresh new week. Our last episode on Saturday. If you missed it, you want to check that out. We had 4 great guests, friends of mine, all farmers from different areas, and I think you should check it out when you can. You get a little bit of an overview of hemp farming and some of the ideas that and practices that those guests are taken into this year. But this week we're going to go into a deeper dive. We're going to look at farming again, because it's the time of year where our farmers are thinking about planting. I know in Georgia we're preparing the fields, and in other areas you may still be under a blanket of snow, but you're really mentally preparing and getting your genetics in line and really your programs in line to have a successful yield in 2020. So with that deep dive, we're going to have a very special guest on, someone that I know and I really appreciate their knowledge, one of the most renowned experts in the industry, both from a genetics and breeding idea, but also for planting and farming. And he comes over from a broader cannabis industry, but is really focusing heavy into our hemp industry. And that is Scott Burgett with Green Earth Cannaceuticals. And as I said, I know Scott. I rely on Scott for his expertise, and glad to have him on this morning. Scott, how are you?
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Clint. It's nice to be here. Like I say, we're down in Florida where it's warming up quite a bit and getting ready for the big start of our industry. So glad to be here and glad to help you guys out.
Well, that's awesome. And you have a very strong reputation in the industry, and particularly in Florida, which is going to come online this year after some thought that a little uncertainty, I would say. So tell me a little bit about yourself before we dig into the hemp industry. Who is Scott Burgett? Give me your background and how you've gotten all the way around into the hemp industry.
Like I say, growing up as a late teenager, I worked a lot in the nursery industry, got into plant propagation, really had a very good horticulture background, a couple really good mentors that were working on seed projects. So I was a science geek and a science-minded kid, and I enjoyed botany. Later, I got in the medical field. I've been to pharmacy school. I'm an interventional cardiovascular specialist. And when medical marijuana came into the state of Florida, I left the medical field to cultivate medical marijuana. So I was one of the largest medical marijuana growers in the state of Florida. We kind of had a different view of the purpose of the industry. So I left with that company, and that's when I really started evaluating hemp. I went to do a processing contract out in Colorado and trying to slow my head down from the hustle and bustle of medical marijuana. And as I looked at the hemp projects out there and the scale and how everything was going, it quickly became apparent to me that this is a very good industry to be in. So for the last roughly 3.5, 4 years, I've been consulting across the U.S. with different hemp growers, setting up extraction facilities and processing hemp. So we've worked with different genetics breeding programs. We're involved with basically all aspects of hemp. So now that Florida is going with their hemp program for the last 1.5 years, I've pretty much dedicated myself to helping in the Florida area. We're pilot partners with FAMU and the Florida pilot program. Last year, we were the only company to have harvests in the state of Florida. We got 2 harvests in a Alturas area, which is south central Florida, and 2 harvests in the Tallahassee area in northern Florida. So we have the advantage of having the medical marijuana knowledge from the industry in Florida, and that kind of gave us a good advantage in the hemp industry, knowing how the plants react in this environment. And like I say, the humidity and the heat here in Florida is going to be a hard thing for the hemp farmers. So we're working with them and trying to get them up to speed on what it really takes to get this plant grown in Florida.
Well, I know that our listeners are all over the United States and potentially beyond. You had mentioned that you had been out into other areas, other regions to work and give guidance. Tell me how, besides just the climate, what's different from the southeast versus other areas? How does it affect your growing?
A lot of people don't look at latitude and, like I say, elevation. There's a lot of aspects to it, and depending on the genetics of the strains that you're growing, some of them originate in high climate areas, and they tend to do better. Like I say, I love the elevation of about 1,200 feet. But like I say, a lot of people don't look at that kind of stuff. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to stuff that way. Um, Genetics plays a big role. Humidity levels, is one plant going to be more susceptible to fungal problems? Moving plants from Montana to Colorado to Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, the cannabinoid profiles vary substantially due to environment and climate that they're grown in. Uh, and like I say, grow practices and plant heights, there's a lot of things to look at. Tennessee and Kentucky now are kind of coming to the conclusion that you don't want to have a 6 foot tall plant, a 7 foot tall plant. You want something around the 4 foot plant size. Same thing, Florida, we have the issue of, and Georgia's going to have this problem too. You guys don't get it quite as bad as we do, but the natural harvest cycle is in the middle of hurricane season. So everything on this eastern seaboard needs to kind of be aware of that. It's just one of those things that we can't really do anything about. Um, but smaller plants do better in these high wind storms than large plants do. So it's a balance of plant count per acre and your yields. So it's a balancing act, but we're trying things like that in Florida. We'll be planting crops at different dates to have different veg heights and test them. But there's a lot. It's a brand new industry, uh, and I think farmers that do their due diligence and testing and really observe their crop, I think it's a great industry to be in.
Uh, your insight is very very helpful. I just listen to you and think about our particular situations, and you do mention Tennessee and Kentucky and their look at plant height. What is what is the factors besides winds? I know what are the factors that you say a shorter plant may be more productive than a 6 foot, 7 foot plant?
One of the big things is the amount of money you have in that plant as a farmer. An extra 4 weeks of growth cycle to get an extra 2 foot of plant. What are your input costs on that extra month of growing that plant? It's truly going to yield you more than the small plant if you had a higher plant density versus smaller or larger, lower number plant counts. It's an economic impact study that we do that we're trying to figure out, and um, this is a plant that the input costs aren't low. It's expensive to grow, so the bottom line is the key to this. Being able to maximize your yield per input cost. Like I say, as a nursery kid, I had an old mentor when I was probably 15 or 16, and I was working really hard and asked him for a raise, and he goes, "Well, you want to be a nurseryman?" And I said, "Yeah, I love this." He says, "Well, if you want a raise, figure out how to save yourself some money." And it's kind of that principle in farming, and farmers do that all the time. They're very innovative people. So I think that to me is kind of the exciting part of the industry of hemp as opposed to medical marijuana. Innovations and the thoughts and ideas of different farmers and different propagation and cultivation techniques is amazing to me. So like I say, it's not a set it and forget it crop. It's take something that is going to take monitoring and again insight from farmers. I've got a lot of farmers that want to grow. Hey, I'm ready to start a 100-acre, 200, 500-acre farm, and they haven't grown this plant. They don't. We don't have good data on absolute input costs in Florida. I know what it cost my farmer this year. I know I can do it cheaper, but we have to have scientific numbers to evaluate that. So having one grow cycle, I can't lock things in that well. So this year we're expanding the number of farmers in the program. We're working closer with, now that the commercial industry is going, I've got a lot of commercial farmers that want to participate with data collection also. Um, it's going to take a lot of people collecting data and figuring these things out. So, that's one of the things we try to do is collaborate with different organizations and different groups to get people working together to solve this issue. Every issue we have, it's not an isolated issue. All farmers are having them. It's planning and crop management. This is a crop management crop. If you're not doing your testing, you're not tracking, when you get to the end of this, um, is it going to be profitable? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But without the good data collection, we can't tell you how to maximize what you have. And here's where you save money, and here's where you spent money you shouldn't have spent. So tracking and collecting data and communication is the key as groups gather and work together to do this.
Now, we're looking at outdoor primarily from what we just spoke about, but I want to just briefly touch on indoor versus outdoor preparation and grow cycles, planting times. What's your thoughts on indoor versus outdoor within the hemp industry?
I think, and from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing about Florida soils, and I wish I knew more about Georgia. I'll look into it, but I use a company, Waters Agricultural Labs, to do a lot of heavy metal sampling of our soils. Cannabis is a soil remediator without any doubt. If you have heavy metals on your farm, your plant's going to pick it up. So having information like that, and know, again, we do research. Is heavy metals a dead kill your crop? Oh my gosh, I can't do anything. They all come out in processing, but going to the indoor grow, you have control of that. If you're container growing, you're not going to have any of those issues. You control the inputs to the plant. You can control the environment. You can flower at any time of the year with light depth. You can keep them in veg with additional lighting. So it gives you control of the plant. I think for the smokable market, if farmers are trying to grow hemp for that market specifically, I believe the indoor farm is the way to go with that. I also think within 3 years to 4 years, hemp for oil production is either going to have to go indoors in greenhouses, or we're going to have plants that we've bred that are multi-purpose for both fiber and oil production. So we're looking into that. Like I say, indoor gives you control. It costs more money. You can't afford to grow biomass for extraction and grow it indoors. I don't think. I've been playing with the idea, if you're a processor and you have your own facility and you're looking at, if you look at it as a production model, it fits very well. You can keep a production facility fed year round on an indoor grow because you can harvest year round. You're not storing super sacks of biomass that you buy, at a whole bunch of them in October and then store them to process through the year. So I believe the indoor market for oil production is a good opportunity. People should look at that. And again, this is the new thing and it's starting right now, but where is the industry going to go and why would it go that way? Fiber production, as soon as that happens, I've got 15 tons of fiber seed here in Florida ready to go to farms. I know farms that want it. Right now, I don't have anybody to process, so I don't want farmers growing something that there's no processing for. But as soon as that gets out, all the oil producers that are within a couple miles, 3 to 5 miles, there's a good chance they're going to get pollinated by that fiber crop. The fiber farmer does not sex his plants. It doesn't matter. He's growing fiber. So at that point, I think it's going to start in small sections and kind of spread like a rash, unless counties and governments segregate this some way. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah, that'll be difficult to do. Scott, we're going to take a break right now. That's very interesting. I wasn't necessarily thinking about going down the fiber path, although that's a part of the industry that is going to be around, and I think going to be around long term. Afterwards, after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about genetics, get really in depth about breeding requirements. We can talk about the fiber production seed as well, but let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to be continue to be joined by Mr. Scott Burgett. We'll see you on the other side.
You are now listening and watching to In the Weeds Live, brought to you by U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos, Sunbelt Hemp Source, Hemp Harvest Works, Bish Enterprises, Elite Extraction, and for today, at very least, we have Green Earth Cannaceuticals. And I give you your host, our host, Clint Smith of Sunbelt Hemp Source. Take it away, Clint.
Welcome back. The first segment was a lot of talk about Florida and growing. We've got Scott Burgett with us, just enjoying the conversation. We're going to get a little bit deeper dive into genetics and breeding and what you should look for as a farmer and a purchaser of genetics from groups around the country. There are quite a few in the industry that do offer genetic programs and seed starts and cloning. So let's just turn it over to Scott with the idea of he's going to guide us into what we should look for when we're going to plan our crop in 2020 and beyond. So, Scott, what do you look for when you look into a genetics company and you're trying to find the right product, your geography, all of the conditions that you're going to deal with?
First of all, the first thing I would check as a farmer is what are my state's requirements on seeds or cultivars, clones, seedlings. Make sure if you have any certifying agency requirements or anything like that you're following that. Also, as you're talking with different genetics providers, how long have they been breeding seed? How many strains do they have? COAs on that variety. A farmer is going to get a certificate of analysis, a COA with seed or clones. That COA is basically just a snapshot in time. Most COAs don't tell you what production they were taken in. So it's basically a ticket to bring the seed in or the plant in. It's not very valuable research material for a farmer. Does the provider have consecutive COAs in flower production? That's very critical. If I have several COAs throughout the production of that plant and harvest, and that's what we'll be doing with all of our genetics, I can test it, my plants as a farmer, find my potency, and I can line it up on a chart basically where I am in flower production. So then the COA becomes a tool, not just the ticket to bring the genetic into the industry. A lot of states, their hemp rules for that state don't include THCA. Some states that's okay right now. That all changes in October next year. So as you're looking at COAs, make sure you're getting COAs with total THC, not just Delta 9 THC. I get people wanting to send me hemp for biomass or flower sales in Florida, and if it comes from Oregon, they're all happy because the Delta 9 is like 0.01. Well, your THCA is 0.5. So you have to take your THCA, if your COA looks that way, if you take that THCA and multiply it by 0.877 and then add your Delta 9 THC, that will give you the total THC. So if it's not listed on the COA, I urge farmers to look at that. Educate yourself on the statutes of your state. That is federal. All states are going to have to comply with that. And due to that, you're going to also see that the CBD levels with farmers that were growing 13% CBD, 14% CBD, most of that was done in states that didn't count THCA. So I'm not as excited about 12% CBD flower. What I'm looking at is the total THC. And we will work with good producing plants and keep breeding for higher CBD levels. But right now, again, a lot of the high potency CBD plants really aren't hemp compliant or haven't been proven to be hemp compliant.
Let me ask you a question right there. Now that's at maturity. Those high CBD producers can still be grown as long as your testing is consistent and you can harvest at a point before they reach that non-compliant level. Correct?
Correct, and that's why we recommend that as I put seeds out that and genetics out into the industry, um, I will make sure farmers are testing adequately. If you start testing at week 4, 5, 6, you're not going to miss it. You've started your testing process, and it's the only thing a farmer has that really protects him is testing. Now in Florida, if I test at week 4 and it's very low THC, and I know it will be, 5 is coming up. 6 is where it's starting to ramp up a little bit. Week 7 is where I think most of my plants will be compliance tested at. But if I happen to get a test result in week 6 that, wow, this plant's maturing faster than we think, we can get that hemp compliance test taken then within a day after getting results. Go ahead.
Now, and testing is so important in this days hemp growers for 2020 and beyond. So I've got several points and questions. I agree with you. When we're doing our compliance testings as breeders, we take samples every week, starting at the beginning of flower. For one, we are interested in the progression of both THC and CBD and other cannabinoid contents. But we sample at week 4, week 6, if necessary, week 7, week 8, week 9. We want to also see which varieties are going to peak earlier and later, and that's another item that a farmer can be aware of, but don't take that for granted. If you buy a seed or cultivar that is supposed to be harvested later or has a later mature date, you can't always take that to the bank. You still have to test because environmental conditions mean so much when you're planting these. You could have different varieties or the same varieties in multiple locations and get completely different results. So in that idea of harvesting at different times, are you going to try to stagger different varieties with your farmers so that they can harvest at different times potentially?
We try to do that. That's part of what we look at. Can I reduce labor costs by not having to hire large crews to harvest my whole farm? Can I stage it over a 2-week period? I think that's a perfect environment for larger farms as we go forward. So yes, we track that and we test in the research program. Florida rules, you have to have a hemp compliance test. Once you're hemp compliant, and that's the official test that you're using for compliance, the crop has to be harvested within 15 days. Uh, so at the point of harvest, you might have a plant that's above that 0.3 limit, but if you're compliance with that test and you have a processor ready to process, you get higher CBD contents by letting it go a little longer. It's knowing the statutes and the rules of your state, but in the pilot program, that's one of the things we will take a compliant crop and we'll harvest it for our farmers in our program and make sure they get their money out. But we also take a section of that crop and continue to grow it. I want to know when it gets hot.
Right.
I want to know that if I know in week 9 the majority of these plants are now hot, I want to make sure my farmers know to test, week 7, so they're safe. We want
It's
that.
not worth the risk.
Uh, and I talk to farmers about it all the time, and they get amazed when you look at how many tests you're really talking about. If they have 4 strains, you're talking about 16 tests, and I would suggest getting an organization and work with a lab. Find a testing lab that'll work with a group of you guys. Get your testing costs down, but uh, people are worried about, well, maybe I only test each strain twice. Well, the two extra tests cost you $100. If you're wrong in your testing, it could cost you your whole crop. So I look at it as probably the cheapest insurance you can have. It also provides you some of the most valuable data you could ever have.
In
Go
the
ahead.
pilot program, now, point 0.3 is the compliant limit for total THC. We know this. But in Florida, is it going to be, are they going to the 10th or are they going to the 100th? Is it 0.3 and then it doesn't matter what comes after that? Or are they going to look at it as a 0.3 something in the compliance testing?
It is 0.3. There is no rounding up. There's no rounding down. 0.399 is acceptable.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's scientifically the way things are. The way that is written, any kind of number written scientifically, that last number is an estimated number, which means 0.3, if you want to get scientific and everything, is an estimated number. So they can't round to an estimated number. It's on significant figures.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all words and stuff, but no, they're not rounding up.
That's good. That's what North Carolina does in their program, and that's where we are right now. That's where we've had our genetics. So that is helpful. The other question I have for Florida, we talked about multiple varieties. I know in Georgia, and I'm not certain in other states, but if you grow two varieties in one plot, it is okay, and you have to have a 12-foot buffer between those, but those are considered to be two different tests. You don't want to have them all together because you may have a one that is maturing faster, one that the ratio is elevating before the other one. So tell me a little bit about Florida with multiple varieties in the same plots.
That's one of the things I'm still reading on, and now that the new rules were just accepted and everything last week, it was you could grow multiple strains in the same plot, but if you had a hot test result, it affected the whole plot, not just the strain. So there was some confusion there. I recommend that farmers try to separate the strains in some way. I don't believe any of the Department of Ags from any of the states in the United States really want a farmer to fail or want to come destroy crops. It's verbiage on how the rules are written. So again, that's one of the things that you really need to know what your state rules are. These are things that I'm still reading through all the fine print on everything, but I discuss things like that with FDAX and Holly Bell to make sure that we're providing the right information. They do consider in Florida, the last rule that I read, if you had multiple strains all within the same plot, and one of those strains was hot, the whole plot is subject to that test.
Okay. Well, then that's something that farmers need to be very cognizant of, and I know you'll guide your farmers. Scott, let's take a break right now. I want to come back and talk to you a little bit about not only your outlook in Florida for 2020, but I want you to talk about a business projection for the country, for the industry for 2020 and beyond that. So everyone hang around for just a few minutes. We're going to be back, and we're going to be talking with Mr. Scott Burgett. Later in the show, we are also going to have Hunter Buffington on to talk to us about the CARES Act. Hang around. We'll be back in the weeds.
You are listening to In the Weeds Live. You can catch podcasts of In the Weeds Live at intheweedslive.com. This podcast is live, but also podcast, and is brought to you by U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos, Sunbelt Hemp Source, Hemp Harvest Works, which you just saw some footage from them and their Nebraska site, Bish Enterprises, Elite Extraction, and on with us today is Scott Burgett of Green Earth Cannaceuticals. And back to our host, Clint Smith. Here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. Again, we're talking with Scott Burgett, really getting in depth about growing, because this is an industry that is new to many of the participants. Everyone wanted to get in and get a piece of the pie, and our farmers are always looking for a way to have profitable yields in their agricultural ventures. So maybe hemp is the right answer for some of those, but you have to be careful. In many instances, farmers don't have to worry about their crops other than making sure that they make it to the end to harvest season. This is the one agricultural crop that you have to make sure that it stays compliant to the harvest. So we've been talking a little bit about that testing, about genetics, which is one of the first things that you're going to deal with when planting your hemp crop. But we're going to talk to Scott right now a little bit more about his outlook for hemp in Florida in 2020 from a business perspective. And then we want to go a little bit broader, because I know you're listening to us from everywhere. I want to hear what his thoughts are and projections are for 2020 and beyond for the hemp industry, for the CBD market, other cannabinoids, CBG and others. I know those are hot topics, although the demand may not be there what everyone thinks it is yet. So Scott, tell me a little bit about business projections within Florida and outside of Florida for 2020, and then let's break it down to what you see long term for the industry.
All right, Clint. In Florida in 2020, and in most of these new states coming online that don't have a hemp program going, I see this as a really big year of learning. There's going to be a steep learning curve. Farmers should be thinking about, is the infrastructure there for my crop? That's what we found here in Florida this year. There were several extraction facilities that were here ready to go, supposedly, and we're still having issues getting crops processed. So having a plan, knowing that you can get your crop dried and processed is huge. And that's the infrastructure, I think, is going to be the point that needs to really grow this year. Farmers, I'm quite confident, can grow the crop with some assistance and some good practices. Is there a facility to process it? These facilities cost a lot of money to put in, and we're talking about high throughputs. If you get 2,000 pounds per acre, having a machine that can process 100 pounds a day doesn't help. We need good processing. We need people with experienced processors, and some of the experts in processing, or proclaimed experts, haven't processed at this scale. It's a brand new industry. There's a lot of experts that are experts in the field because they are talking to people and they haven't really done anything. So that's the troublesome spot for me in the industry, and that's what I've worked with in Florida, is trying to align processors up for at least my pilot program farmers and as many farmers as I can. And we're looking now in Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee. I mean, this is going to be a crop that's going to move around the United States. It's going to be a commodity. People are going to, the industry is going to happen. People are worried about lack of demand for CBD oil or distillate, isolate products. It's my opinion that the demand hasn't even been seen yet. It's new federally to a lot of big companies also that weren't playing with this until it's federally deregulated. Not being a Schedule One cannabinoid now, hemp's good. Big companies are looking for large volumes of oil. Um, the problem I see in the industry from the extraction and processing side is a lack of GMP certified processors. A lot of these big companies, they want a continuum of quality assurance. If they're a GMP certified manufacturer like Maybelline, Revlon, Nestle, Coke, Pepsi, they need a continuum of quality assurance, and it needs to come from a GMP certified processing facilities. So we're working with building those centers and getting them GMP certified, but I don't think we'll meet the oil demand anytime soon. I know that's a big scare of a lot of people. I That doesn't cause me any kind of fear. I believe this is going to be a product that's around forever. It is going to have a real big peak here for a year and then taper down, and it'll become a commodity. So being able to get in with extraction groups early and as a farmer form a relationship with those people, it's my opinion the processors have to take care of the farmers. The farmers, in my opinion, are taking the majority of the risk in this industry. As a propagator, I can do very well selling clones and seeds, and I'm out the door safe and sound. I might have to worry about litigation if I sell bad genetics, but my money's in my hand. The farmer's got input costs, he's got labor, he's got the environment, and he's label or has to follow compliance standards. There's a lot of things on that farmer's shoulders. Um, then you take it into a processing center, and the processing centers generate a good amount of revenue too. Uh, the farmer is the guy that's, like I say, putting in a lot of the work, a lot of the time, taking on all the risk, and the margin is not what it should be for the farmers. We're trying to work with processors that will take a different view on the industry. For me, my processing mindset is I look at a farmer as this is the cost of acquiring a client. If I have good farmers involved in a good processing plan, paying farmers above market value to make sure you have a good, steady stream of processable material that's continually compliant, that is grown professionally. If you have a GMP certified extraction facility and you can hit these volumes, uh, it is an incredible industry. And I don't think people have yet to put that together. It's coming, and that's the thing. Farmers have to realize it's coming. People will build it. It costs a lot of money to build these things, and it's harder to get these extraction facilities built where we need them for this coming year. A lot of the big processors are looking at other states like Oregon that have an excess of biomass, and they can buy it at pennies on the dollar. It doesn't help the Florida or Georgia farmers, but it's a fact. I know a company from Florida that has an extractor in Oregon, and I've asked them, please stay here. We can fill it. The farmers need it, and I think they'll put one here also. We're trying to get that built up, but like I say, we're running a lot of directions at one time. And right now we're focusing on the farmers and growing and working with processors to facilitate crop processing. Uh,
That's the bottleneck, and we've heard this term for actually a year or two in the industry. The bottleneck has been processing. One thing that Georgia has done that other states are looking at, and some like it, some don't. I actually am one that does. You have to be aligned with a processor in order to grow, and I think that is a protection of the farmer because the investment that the farmer is making is their livelihood. You're right. Processing plants are hugely expensive, and if done right, they're even more expensive, as you said, to have a GMP facility, maybe ISO labs involved, but they're going to be able to get their product. I look at the state like Tennessee, where in 2018 they had roughly 800 licensed growers. In 2019, they had roughly 4,000 licensed growers, and most of those farmers got into it without having an end use in mind. Unfortunately, many got hurt, and that's not just isolated to Tennessee. I'm not picking on Tennessee, but we do have to make sure that we have the capabilities to take care of these farmers in the end game, because they are the ones that are putting their necks out, so to speak, in this industry. Now, let's move beyond Florida, as well as beyond this year. And you did slightly touch on this, that you think that the industry is just budding. But let's look at it as far as beyond CBD, beyond cannabinoid profile, or beyond CBD. You can throw in other cannabinoids such as CBG and CBN and the others that are boutique right now. That, as well as fiber. What is your projection for hemp the next 5 years, 10 years within the United States?
I believe like I said, I think a lot of the CBD oil plant production will go into greenhouses and indoors. Um, as it's being used and being taken into the human body, I think it will give better control of the product that you have out there. I think it's one of the only ways to uh, keep that potency up. So I think there will be a shift that way. But I truly believe that within the next 4 to 5 years, that we could have a multi-use crop that, through breeding, that I can grow for fiber and oil production all at the same time. I think that the industrial hemp for fiber and that industry, it's unlimited. This is one of the coolest plants you'll ever see. The beautiful part about it is it's inspiring young minds. You got people that can do stuff and visualize things that I can't even comprehend. How do you make an electric board that out of hemp that's can transmit electricity better than any other? I mean, it's amazing. They're coming up with. You talk about 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 uses. It's a beautiful plant. It's green. The fact that it does environmental remediation. I mean, there's a lot of uses for this that we haven't even touched on. Boy, if anybody's got $1 billion, I tell you what, give me a call. Let's figure out how to make Publix grocery bags out of plastic biodegradable hemp. You wouldn't have to make another product. So, like I say, there's all kinds of stuff out there. It's research and development, and that's the thing that people have to realize also is, as this is touted as this huge industry, I believe it will be. We are at the infancy of this, and Florida and Georgia are behind. Hello?
Hey, Scott. I want to just ask you to hang around for just a few minutes. We are going to go to a break, and then, Scott, I'm going to have questions for you. I know we're going to have call in for you, but we're going to have Hunter Buffington on next, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in our industry right this moment, where our farmers and our industry participants are having a hard time getting treated equally in the CARES Act. So hang around. We're going to be back after the break. We're going to talk with Hunter Buffington, and we're going to have questions for Scott Burgett as well coming up.
You are now listening and watching In the Weeds Live, brought to you by U.S. Hemp Growers, Conferences and Expos, Sunbelt Hemp Source, Hemp Harvest Works, Bish Enterprises, Elite Extraction, and for today, Green Earth Cannaceuticals. Podcasts can be found at intheweedslive.com. And I bring you back to our host, Clint Smith. How are you doing, Clint? How's your show going for you? How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. So far, so good. I tell you, we've had a great time talking with Scott, and I know we're going to have questions for him after we get to the end of this segment. But we are here for one reason, and that's to support the hemp industry and support our hemp farmers, specifically in this early part of our episodes, because it is planting season. But this industry goes beyond hemp farming. As mentioned, we have processors, we have retailers, we have those that are in the CBD industry, and right now they're not getting treated quite equally. And we have Hunter Buffington, who is the executive director of Hemp Feed Coalition, who is really fighting for that. Hunter, how you doing? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here with us. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, introduce yourself. I want to hear a little bit about Hemp Feed Coalition, but then go directly into what's happening with the CARES Act. Why are we not getting treated equally amongst agriculture and small business?
Yeah, so let me start by introducing the work that we do at the Hemp Feed Coalition. I think that will help speak to why this is on our radar. But the Hemp Feed Coalition was formed almost 3 years ago to gain legal federal approval of hemp as an animal feed product. The goal is to help connect farmers to processors, to feeders, and to establish and open new markets for specifically hemp grain products first, but byproducts and waste products for that hemp that can be used and made from hemp processing, because they're incredibly nutritious. And right now, those are just being waste products. So I pay quite a lot of attention to the regulatory establishment, looking at where we are with public policy and how it affects not only the federal interaction with hemp, but then on a state by state basis. And when the CARES Act came out, I had quite a lot of my constituents, both farmers as well as processors, small business owners, and quite a few hemp related businesses who reached out to me and said, how do we access some of this relief so that we can keep our employees, especially as we get ready to go into the growing season. It was stressful. A lot of farmers are struggling to get ready to plant when there's issues accessing labor, as well as even the marketplace. Without events like the U.S. Hemp Growers conferences and expos, it's really hard for farmers to source a lot of the materials and expertise that they need. So I started hearing from more and more individuals, specifically farmers, that they were being told by their banks and their financial institutions that they didn't qualify because there was confusion, we'll call it confusion, over the difference between hemp and marijuana, and that at the federal level, cannabis as an overarching theme was not approved federally. And so their banking institutions were struggling to determine that this was in fact covered underneath the CARES Act. This is not the first time that we as an industry have experienced that. In fact, we just tried to open a new bank account for the nonprofit itself. It took 3 months of investigating to identify 3 potential financial institutions. When I started having conversations with them, 2 of those had incredibly high monthly account balances that they wanted us to maintain, which is difficult for a nonprofit in the first place. But then additionally, one of them, who is a well-established hemp services provider, then told me that it was going to be 6 weeks of a committee reviewing our past banking history to determine whether or not they would open an account. And so that was one of the easier stories of people accessing financial services. But I've had a number of constituents who've reached out to me either with bank closures or recently have had a lot more scrutiny placed upon them because they are a hemp-related business. And once we started really investigating what the CARES Act had as far as the opportunities for relief specifically for farmers. First is a great need for more stimulus to be directed towards our farming and agricultural sectors in general. We're not really highlighting the rest of the agriculture sector, but there was definitely a real need for some more relief to be designated for those farmers in our food supply. But what we did find is that when we noticed that there was a lack of resources for farmers, it was then compounded by the financial segment and their confusion over whether hemp is cannabis. A number of individuals that I've worked with in the last 2 weeks have shared communications that they received from banks and their own financial institutions expressing their own confusion over whether hemp is a legal agricultural commodity in the United States. So that was really what led us to take on this work to spread the message, not only to our constituents to help reach out to their own legislators, but then to begin to identify potential partners to help us really work towards getting farmers support, and specifically hemp farmers included. That's Nanook, and he obviously feels very strongly about this too this morning. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we started a task force just a week ago, and Melissa and the director of the U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expo was an integral part of starting that task force. We then added another 4 individuals to that task force specifically to start working on this project. And since then, as of right now, we have we just added our 20th organizational supporter to our letter that we're going to be sharing with our congressional leaders today. And I have not seen a group come together like this to specifically represent hemp farmers since I started in the industry. And I think this is a real change in the environment for our farmers. And I want to make sure that they know that there are organizations out there that are really thinking about them and going to bat for them, stepping to the plate and acknowledging that there's some things that need to be fixed, and also stepping in to do that work, not just saying, hey, here's an issue and someone needs to fix it, but rather coming in and trying to offer some solutions too.
Well, in 6, I want you to tell us and tell all our listeners what we can do to help you, what we can do to help get this pushed through.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Clint. So there's a number of places where you can access the form letter. What is the most helpful right now is for our legislators to hear from their constituents directly that this is a concern and that they want them to focus on it. That letter can be found on our website, hempfeedcoalition.org. You can also find it in the weeds. I believe you guys are going to have a link for us up there on the podcast. And then I know that the U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos is going to have a letter up on their website. We also have a number of partners as well, and you can find a link to that letter and see those partners on our website too.
Fantastic. And I've actually seen the letter, and it's a heartfelt letter, and it affects more in the industry and more in our beloved industry than one might think. So let's all try to rally together and support Hunter and what she's doing to spearhead this, so that we can get some equality within the banking world and within the government world that we're working within. So Hunter, thank you for coming on, and I hope you'll stick around. I hope we're going to have some calls coming in here pretty soon, and they may be for you. I'm going to bring Scott back in to comment on this quickly. Scott, what do you think? Are you're in Florida and the industry is just getting going. Have you heard anyone that's tried to get some help under the CARES Act and hasn't been able to get it? Have you tried to get help under the CARES Act?
I personally haven't. Like I say, in Florida, we're having most of the farmers are dealing with that I'm hearing, trying to get small business loans, farm loans, that kind of stuff. So financially, the banks, even with me, I'm having problems getting processing and stuff. but I haven't dealt with the CARE Act hardly at all.
And we at Sunbelt Hemp Source and Global Genetics before that, we did have to go through the process. Global Genetics, you might note, that does not have hemp or cannabis anywhere in that. That's the name that we used to get our initial funding for our operation. Now we are Sunbelt Hemp Source now, and our bank, Ameris Bank, has taken care of us and has treated us very well, and we really appreciate that. So that's one item that is going to be ongoing, but we are going to see some better unity, I hope, in the banking systems to help us out. Dave, if you're around, do we have any calls? Do we have any questions on the line that for Scott or Hunter and any of
Not
our
quite
guests?
at the moment. You will hear people call in though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get some calls coming in, but right now we'll take until we do, and we'll give this 5 minutes or so, maybe 10, to see if we get any calls to come in for questions of our guests. But I would like to talk to Scott and Hunter both, and just ask them what, in the industry, do you see farmers getting in and then having to get out? Have you seen that, or do you think that we're going to have some stability going forward? Hunter, I'll start with you. On your side, do you see stability in the industry?
So I think that's the $50 million question, Clint. Thanks for bringing that up right away this morning. It's interesting because we have seen still a steady increase of new registrants in Colorado, where I am actually located. And I've heard from other departments of agriculture that they're also seeing 20% increases over registrations from last year. So I really thought that we were going to see a lull in some of the enthusiasm, at least for new registrants, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I have heard some of my first year farmers that came in last year have decided that maybe hemp's not for them, and so some of them have decided to do something different. But the farmers that have been growing since the very beginning, most of them are in it for the long game, and so they're weathering the storm that was last year and getting ready to plant again this year.
Fantastic. And I like to hear the growth side of it. And I think some of that growth is because of the infrastructure, the processing, the throughput is being able to be met. Scott, on your side, you and I both are in states that are emerging. We've been in North Carolina so that we could be part of their pilot program and be able to transition from Colorado to the Southeast, where we're going to be farming primarily. But we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we haven't brought that up. How, Scott, do you see the pandemic affecting Florida and your industry and how it evolves there?
Not really. Like I said, the farmers here in Florida are really motivated. They've been biting at the bit for a long time to get started. So I think it's going to, and I think there's going to be a lot of farmers that get into this. Again, I think the key is to be able to have a responsible plan on what you're going to do with your crop when it's done. Unlike Georgia, our farmers can grow and they don't have to have a plan. What I've seen in every state that I've been in, the farmers that look at it as an agricultural industry and a business will do well. The ones that don't track it, don't take it as a business, it's not a get rich quick scheme. There's no pot of gold underneath the plant. But like I say, the quarantine and that kind of stuff, we space our plants a little bit under that 6-foot limit, but like I say, we're compliant.
We do have a caller right now. Caller, you are on the line live with In the Weeds Live. Do you hear us?
Yes, I do.
What is your question for today?
I think I recognize that. I think I recognize that voice. Is this Jason Box?
It is, Clint. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Jason is part of Sunbelt Hemp Source. He is our He is our genetics leader and director of grow operations. Good morning. What's your question, Jason? Who's it for? Me? I hope not. I hope we don't have anything going wrong in North Carolina.
Well, yeah, everything's going. Just general questions for Scott on some of the stuff he was touching base on. I was wondering about some of the advertised flowering times on some of these strains, but when he gets them down to Florida in a different latitude, they're going to start initially at a different time. And I don't know if he's advising his farmers anything along those lines.
I lost part of that question, but I heard it was about flowering times in different latitudes. Yeah, we inform our farmers that truthfully, I don't put any value on a COA coming from anywhere. We test in Florida, assuming that none of that matters. It's a different environment totally. The latitude and our flowering, when we go into flower, is different. So we tell our farmers to be very cautious. Treat it as a time bomb. Yeah, you don't know when it's going to go off. Test it, test it, test it. I think for the first couple years, that's going to be the mantra, test. Until we get these plants climatized to our region, and that's going to take a couple years to do, we won't have really good data on this. So the environment, the latitude does make a difference. I'm glad he brought up that question. A lot of people don't look at that. Some of my farmers in South Florida, Southern Florida, they look at the climate and say, great, I'm not going to get froze out. I can run flower all year. They have to be educated on the fact that it's phototropic, and the day lengths, real South Florida, it's going to, I think, make flower quality a little lower. The higher temperature, this plant likes cold weather. Everybody's worried about freezes in Florida. I've had plants that have hit 26 degrees for 4 or 5 hours, and they come out of it just fine. I haven't lost a plant to cold weather yet. But like I say, the hot weather, latitude, the day lengths in Southern Florida, I think is going to be an issue. Also, the extra humidity, salt. There's a lot of stuff we don't know yet.
Right.
Until we do.
Well, along those.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Scott. Along those same lines, the phenotypic expressions of some of these varieties, because I know some breeders aren't going to F5 or F7 to stabilize these lines. So when you have, like you're mentioning, these environmental stresses down there will affect different phenos of the same seed line. You know, if a farmer's buying in seed from a seed company that hasn't stabilized their genetics yet.
Correct. And that's one of the things that we're doing in the research program here in Florida is I'll be dealing with seed breeders from other states. I really want to get seed breeders to come into the state of Florida for some of their breeding projects. Breeding in Colorado doesn't help me. Breeding does. Love Colorado. I saw Hunter smile, but like I say, it's nothing against anywhere. I think Southeast United States, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, it is a different environment. Like I say, I think it gets better as you go north. Florida is a beautiful area for propagation, vegetative, plant growth. Like I say, the hurricane season really worries me in Florida. But like I say, I think it will be a big hub for also providing plants to the rest of the United States. Our ability to start propagation earlier, seeding and seedling tray production and get them out. I think that's going to be one of the benefits that Florida has. I think Georgia also has the availability to capitalize on that a little bit. But I think for our region here in the Southeast U.S., we need to focus on genetic production in this region. And I think that's going to be one of the factors that truly helps farmers in our region.
Well, you haven't
to
had any
that,
issues with farmers having different expressions than what they expected on a variety? They expected it to look like this, or to have this expression, or to trigger at this time, and it was completely different because of your environment or your latitude or whatever?
The only ones that have grown anything hemp-wise in Florida, like I say, UF has a program. They didn't do anything, in my opinion, in a industrial hemp type setting. We did our trials and we planted 30 acres. So, we actually had industrial grow. But it's one grow. We didn't get plants in the ground till August 2nd. It was way too late, in my opinion, to plant. I had to have my farmer come sit in my office and tell me for sure he even wanted me to order clones. So as I
So you
explained to
just
him
need
what
more data collection.
yeah, I told him this is a terrible idea. He laughed and said, okay, let's go. So, I mean, we did it to get the plants in Florida and growing in Florida. But the data I have from those crops, they went in the ground August 2nd. They were in a transitional period to flower as a 3-inch clone. They had pre-flower sign. We changed the latitude from northern Kentucky to Florida. They went into flower. They really didn't get to veg. They finished up at about 28 inches tall, and they were flower from the first lateral all the way to the tip of every branch. But we put a lot of fertilizer on them, but it was all done at the wrong time. It wasn't done in a regular crop rotation. So I don't look at those data points as realistic data points. I'm more science minded. I have plans to do what they did. We kept plants in supplemental lighting to veg them out for a period of time before we put them into flower in Tallahassee. We went to a later flower cycle, but again, these plants were performing things because I was making them do them. The farmer doesn't have access to supplemental light for 30 acres. The plants we had on Hookar Farms, they didn't get any veg time. So it was done for the purpose of getting the crop in, grown, and trying to get some data to educate some of the public, to show people that it can be done. But the data points really have no value to me. So we're really counting this year as our first year of realistic data on what these plants will actually do. But yes, I believe we'll see phenotypic responses that are different than what they are in other places. Plants will, I think they will perform differently overall than they do in the areas they've been bred at. We have farmers that will be growing on larger scales. Our smaller scale farms, more dedicated towards research, will be pheno hunting plants and again starting breeding programs for plants that respond better to our environment. So all that's coming, and we'd love to work with you guys on some breeding programs and really try to devise genetics or create genetics that will work well in the Southeast U.S. and other places also.
we're looking forward to that. Jason, thanks for calling in. I'll be talking with you a little bit later. And looking on the screen, Dave, do we have anyone else on the line? I do have something for Hunter. I know she wanted to make a comment about her group. If we don't have any other calls right this moment.
Not at the moment, so go right on ahead with Hunter.
Okay, Hunter, you did talk about the members, the groups that have been giving you support. Would you like to highlight those? Would you like to at least tell us who those are in the early help that you're getting?
Yeah, we definitely could not have pulled this effort together without the key members of the task force. And the Hemp Feed Coalition is getting ready for designation as a 501c3. So our goal was really to create, to sound the alarm, if you will, to make sure that people were recognizing that there was an opportunity here to help not only farmers, but to alleviate some of the issues that we've been having with the financial sector. So we called the task force together. Melissa was one of the first people to join that from the U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos. We also had Jessica Scott. She is representing her own business, Scott Communications LLC, but she is on the Hemp Fee Coalition board representing the Midwest Hemp Council. We also had Andrew Bish, who is on the Hemp Fee Coalition, but he also represents a number of state hemp industries associations. And then Eric Steenstra, public policy advisor, many are familiar with through Vote Hemp. And then Brett Goldman, who is a public policy advisor for the Hemp Fee Coalition as well. So that core group really launched the task force. And then together we were able to add quite a few constituents and partners. And I just really appreciate being able to give a shout out to these folks, because it's been a number of, last minute phone calls, reading over lots of documents and checking the language. So I really wanted to give a shout out for those folks. And that's the U.S. Hemp Building Association, Voorhees Farms, the Nebraska HIA, Salt Creek Hemp Company, Colorado Hemp Industries Association, IND Hemp, Hemp Industries Association, the national organization, Green Cherry Organics, our Black Farmers and Agriculturalists of Florida. So I thought that might make some of you on the call happy. Tennessee Hemp Industries Association, the Texas Hemp Industries Association, the Tennessee Growers Coalition, our Hemp Industries Association of Florida, and the Illinois Hemp Growers Association. And thanks, Clint. I poked you a little bit to be able to give a shout out to those organizations, but it's one of the things that I'm most proud of with the work that this particular coalition has done, is just the number of farmer-centric organizations and entities that came together to do this work. So thanks for letting me give them a shout out.
You're very welcome. And I'm glad that you were able to come on this morning. It's earlier for you than it is for Scott and I. Dave's been up early. I know that. And of course, Dave is our producer, Dave Crespo, and we really appreciate what he does. But Hunter, thank you. And it's been great getting to know you this morning. I will be in communication with you. And if there's anything that we can do, you need to make sure that you find our Facebook page, which is Sunbelt Hemp Source, and let's work together so that we can be allies in this movement forward. Scott, going back to you for 1 second, we're going to close up in the next few minutes. If you're going to call in, you better get it in pretty quick in the next 2 or 3 minutes. But Scott, I do want to ask you about the photo cycle in Florida and with regards to testing. We know as breeders when our tests, when our plants are triggered, so to speak. We know the day that we have triggered them to flower. So that's how we gauge our testing. And I know every sample we take is done from that date. The nomenclature goes from that date. Farmers are going to have to look. They're going to have to actually investigate their plants, and not just in one spot, but multiple spots. What are you telling your farmers as far as timing? When do you think you're going to start flowering? At least in the northern Florida areas.
In the northern and central Florida area, I believe we'll go into flower the end of the third week of August. And we tell farmers to, again, you need to walk your plants, you need to scout males, even if you have, if they're growing from seed and it's feminized seed, it doesn't mean everything's female. So scout your plants. But when you first see pistils on that plant and a flower production, you'll see it at the terminal end first. By the time you see that, you are 2 weeks into flower. A lot of farmers don't have that understanding. So when we say that, I think my scheduled compliance test, if I had to guess, would be between week 6 and 7. If you count starting the first day you see pistils, now you're talking week 8 or 9. So they need to understand the flower and the progression of flower development in plants. That's one of the things I put together, and I'll try to get some more information. But my newer farmers in Tallahassee they've never seen hemp grown or cannabis grown. And if you take pictures of your plants when you first see pistils and count that as week 2, and then take a picture of that plant every week, there's very noticeable flower development, and learning the terms as you're describing flowers to people that are trying to help you. Are they stacking? What does stacking mean? So all these are signs of how far you are in flower production. The other thing that I tell people to remember is, if you can't remember, test it. Nobody's going to smack you on the hand for sending it to a test. If you think don't have a clear understanding, test more often. And again, track it. Track your dates on the calendars, and these are the things we have to look at to go at next year. Hey, this is what it did last year. Find your daylight length and know what phototropic radiation is. So, sometimes when we have light, it has no par value. So the plant doesn't really see it, you do. So sometimes they go, well, we still got more than the light source that you say we're going to have. Part of that light day isn't photoactive, so the plant doesn't really value that. So we go by the first time you see pistils, count that as the end of the second week of flower, and go on from there. That's more of a generalization for the farmer. That way it doesn't really matter when your photo period starts. It's at least a point in the flower production to start your count on. So that's kind of more important to me than letting them know that, hey, you don't really know it's in flower yet.
Right.
If we can, get them understanding what's going on, and it's just education.
Yeah,
So
education, giving them a guideline, and collecting data.
Yeah, data is key. People, as they worry about costs of testing and other things, you should value that test material. You've paid for it. Those are the tools to manage your crop in the future. And again, I tell people it's a snapshot in time. It's not the end all and be all. Sometimes you'll have one plant in the field that tests hotter than others. Get a good random sample for your testing. Don't take all your testing samples off one plant. If you do that, you can have issues. Know your state testing requirements. What Florida has a special requirement for what part of the plant and how big of a test sample is required. So know your state's testing. And again, I think if people would open up and look at some of these government agencies as they're not trying to hurt you. This isn't, a lot of farmers look at rules as in, they're obstacles in this industry. They are, but they're obstacles trying to protect the whole industry as a group. So as we're new and developing, there's a lot of rules that people may not agree with. And I think you'll find that they will be changed in time, but I think it has to be a collaboration between the farmers, the departments of ags, and the associations that are dealing with them.
Fantastic. Well, and we're going to, at a later date, we're going to have some of the Department of Ags on to help stand behind, explain their rulings. I want to close the show by thanking our guests. Scott, thank you very much. Scott Burgett with Green Earth Cannaceuticals, and is one of the foremost authorities on hemp and cannabis all over, not just in Florida, but is a friend of ours from Florida. Hunter Buffington with her coalition and what they're doing. And just remember, pound include hemp farmers, hashtag include hemp farmers is a way to reach them. And you can also find the letter online at hempfeedcoalition.org. So Dave, I think that's going to do us for our live show today. Thanks to our guests, and next show will be on Saturday, and I know we're going to have a great lineup. We're going to continue with the farming theme, but we'll bring in also some additional support for our regulatory groups and what's happening on the business side of hemp in the hemp world. So that's it for me for In the Weeds Live. Dave, turning it over to you.
Beautiful. You're just watching and listening to In the Weeds Live. You can check the podcasts at intheweedslive.com. Thanks to our sponsors, U.S. Hemp Growers, Conferences and Expos, Sunbelt Hemp Source, Hemp Harvest Works, Bish Enterprises, Elite Extraction, and a big thanks to Scott from Green Earth Canaceuticals for being on the show today. Again, like Clint Smith of Sunbelt Hemp Source mentioned, we'll be back on Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and your local time is applicable to that. You can catch the show live at facebook.com/intheweedslive, but it's also posted, as I said, at intheweedslive.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay healthy.